The HOA did not just find me, they tried to ruin my name. Tracy Benson is standing in front of my car in the gate entry lane, and she is screaming that I stole a donation box from the Cedar Springs clubhouse. She is waving a clipboard with a complaint form that has no signatures, and she is telling me she has multiple witnesses who saw me take it. I ask her to name one witness, and she refuses. She says she does not need to prove anything, because she is the security vendor point of contact for the Homeowners Association, and her job is enforcement. I work security for a private firm in Fort Worth, Texas, so I know exactly how flimsy her accusation is. But Tracy does not care about evidence. She cares about power. She is blocking the lane, and 3 cars are stacked behind me. Tracy keeps saying the same thing over and over. I do not make the rules. I enforce them. She says it like a shield, like it gives her the right to accuse me of theft without a single piece of proof. I tell her I was not even home when the box went missing. She cuts me off and says she has a security list, and my name is on it. I ask what that means, and she says it means I have been flagged for suspicious activity. I ask who flagged me, and she says that information is confidential. I ask when I was flagged, and she says that does not matter because the flag is active right now. The driver behind me leans on his horn, and Tracy whips around and screams at him to wait. She pulls out a handheld radio and talks into it like she is dispatch, but I can see it is just a cheap walkie-talkie with no LED indicator. She is pretending to call someone, and when she finishes her fake call, she turns back to me and says she is suspending my gate access effective immediately. I tell her she cannot do that without board approval, and she pulls out a laminated policy sheet from her blazer pocket and taps it with her finger. She says the policy gives her discretion to suspend access pending investigation. I ask to see the policy, and she holds it up but pulls it away before I can read it. She says she does not have time to educate me on the rules. I have lived at Cedar Springs for 2 years, and I have never had a problem with Tracy until last month when I filed a complaint about unauthorized towing. The complex is a high-density townhome maze where parking is a constant war, and the tow company Tracy contracts with has been hooking cars without the required 24-hour notice. I sent an email to management with photos of fresh chalk marks and tow timestamps, and the next week, Tracy started showing up at my door with nitpicky violation notices. First it was my trash cans being visible from the street. Then it was a tiny oil spot on my driveway. Then it was my porch light being the wrong color temperature. Every notice had the same closing line. Failure to comply will result in fines and escalated enforcement action. Now she is saying I stole a donation box that was collecting money for a neighborhood charity event. The box was sitting on the clubhouse front desk, and it vanished 2 days ago. Tracy says she reviewed the security footage and saw me near the desk. I tell her I was at the desk to drop off a maintenance request, and she says that does not matter because I was the last person on camera before the box disappeared. I ask her to show me the footage, and she says she already deleted it because she does not need it anymore. She says she has paperwork and vibes, and that is all the proof she needs. I stare at her, and I realize she just gave me her boomerang line. I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. I repeat it back to her to make sure I heard it right, and she nods and says exactly. Tracy pulls out her phone and puts it on speaker. She dials a number, and a man answers. She says this is Tracy Benson with Cedar Springs, and I need a gate fob suspended today. The man asks for the resident name and unit number, and Tracy rattles off my information without asking my permission. The man says he will process the request, and Tracy thanks him and hangs up. She looks at me and says the suspension will be active in 30 minutes, so I better get inside the gate before then. I ask her what I am supposed to do after that, and she says that is not her problem. She says I can appeal the suspension at the next board meeting, which is 3 weeks away. I have work equipment in my townhome that I need to access every day. My job requires me to be on call, and if I cannot get through the gate, I cannot respond to callouts. I tell Tracy this, and she shrugs. She says maybe I should have thought about that before I stole from the neighborhood. I tell her again that I did not steal anything, and she says then, why are you so defensive? I take a breath and tell her I want to file a formal dispute. She pulls a blank form from her clipboard and hands it to me. She says fill it out and drop it at the management office before they close at 5. I check my phone. It is 4:15. The management office is on the other side of the complex, and parking there is always full. If I drive over, I will burn time looking for a spot, and if I walk, I will burn time getting there. Tracy is watching me calculate, and she is smiling. She knows she set a trap. I take the form and tell her I will see her at the office. She steps out of the lane, and I pull forward. The cars behind me follow, and Tracy stands on the curb waving at them like she just did everyone a favor. I park in my assigned spot and jog to the management office. The building is a converted townhome at the front of the complex, and the lobby is tiny. There is a reception window with bulletproof glass and a single plastic chair in the corner. The receptionist is a woman in her 50s named Diane, and she is one of the few people at Cedar Springs who actually listens. I have talked to her twice before about the towing issue, and both times she took notes and promised to escalate. When I walk in, she looks up and sees my face, and she knows something is wrong. I hand her the dispute form, and she scans it. She asks what happened, and I give her the short version. Tracy accused me of stealing a donation box, suspended my gate access without evidence, and gave me less than an hour to dispute it before the office closes. Diane shakes her head and says Tracy has been doing this to 3 other residents this month. She says management is tired of the chaos, but Tracy keeps claiming she is just following policy. Diane pulls out a folder and flips through some printouts. She says Tracy submitted a batch of violation notices last week, and half of them were overturned because the evidence was either missing or fabricated. She says the board is planning to review the security vendor contract at the next meeting, but until then, Tracy still has enforcement authority. Diane tells me to fill out the form completely and include any evidence I have. She says if I can prove I was not at the clubhouse when the box went missing, the suspension will be reversed. I tell her Tracy already deleted the security footage, and Diane's face goes flat. She says that is the 3rd time this month Tracy has deleted footage right before a dispute. She says she is going to note that in the file, and she is going to email the board tonight. I ask if that will help me today, and she says probably not, but it will help build a case for the contract review. I sit in the plastic chair and start filling out the form. The questions are vague. Describe the incident. Provide witness names. Attach supporting documents. I do not have witnesses because I was not there. I do not have supporting documents because Tracy deleted the footage. I write everything I can remember. I was at work during the time window Tracy claimed. I have a timesheet that shows I clocked in at 8 and did not leave until 6. I have a work vehicle GPS log that shows I was at a job site 15 miles away. I attach screenshots of both, and I sign the form. I hand it back to Diane, and she timestamps it. She says she will forward it to the board secretary and copy management. She says I should get a response within 48 hours, but in the meantime, the suspension stands. I ask her what I am supposed to do if I get locked out, and she says she can issue a temporary visitor pass, but it expires every 24 hours, and I will have to come back here to renew it. I ask if that means I have to come here every single day until the dispute is resolved, and she nods. She says those are the rules. I leave the office and walk back to my townhome. My phone buzzes, and it is a text from the gate vendor. Your access has been suspended due to a violation. Contact property management for reinstatement. I screenshot the text and add it to my evidence folder. I have been building a folder on my phone for weeks, ever since Tracy started harassing me, and now it is starting to look like a case file. I have photos of the bogus violation notices, emails where Tracy moved the goalposts, and now I have proof she suspended my access without due process. When I get home, I sit at my kitchen table and pull up the Cedar Springs resident portal. I log in and check the violation history for my unit. There are 6 new entries, all posted in the last 2 weeks. Trash cans visible. Driveway stain. Porch light non-compliant. Unapproved door wreath. Vehicle parked over the line. Suspicious activity near clubhouse. The last one was added today, 2 hours ago. I click on it, and the description says resident observed loitering near clubhouse during time frame of theft incident. There is no footage attached, no witness statement, just a one-line accusation. Someone knocks on my door, and I look through the peephole. It is Tracy. She is holding her mesh evidence tote and a phone. I open the door halfway, and she immediately tries to push past me. I block her with my arm, and she steps back and puts her phone on speaker. She says I am recording this for documentation purposes. I pull out my phone and start recording too. I say the same thing back to her, and she glares at me. She says she is here to conduct a voluntary inspection of my unit. I ask under what authority, and she says the HOA bylaws allow inspections with reasonable notice. I ask her to show me where it says that, and she pulls out her laminated policy sheet again. I tell her I am not letting her in without a board member present, and she says I am obstructing an investigation. I tell her there is no investigation because there is no crime, and she says that is not for me to decide. She says she is adding obstruction to my file, and if I do not cooperate, she will recommend the board move forward with a formal hearing. I ask her what she is looking for, and she says she wants to see if I have any stolen property. I tell her I do not, and she says then, you should have no problem letting me in. I tell her to get a warrant, and she laughs. She says this is not a criminal matter, this is an HOA matter, and warrants do not apply. I tell her I am not letting her in, and she says fine, but this will be noted. She pulls out her phone and starts typing a note, and I can see she is composing an email. She reads it out loud as she types. Resident refused voluntary inspection. Resident became hostile. Resident threatened security personnel. I stop her and tell her I did not threaten anyone, and she says your tone was aggressive, and I felt unsafe. She sends the email and looks at me. She says I am making this worse for myself, and if I just cooperate, this could all go away. I ask her what that means, and she says if I return the donation box and issue a written apology, she will drop the suspension and close the file. I tell her I did not take the box, and she says then where is it? I tell her I do not know, and she says that is convenient. She says the box had over $300 in cash and checks, and now it is gone, and I am the only person on the security list who is near the clubhouse. I ask her again to explain the security list, and she says it is a confidential database of residents who have been flagged for policy violations or suspicious behavior. I ask who maintains the list, and she says she does. I ask who approves additions to the list, and she says she does. I ask if there is any oversight, and she says the board trusts her judgment. I tell her that sounds like a system ripe for abuse, and she says I am only saying that because I am on the list. She pivots and pulls out a set of orange tags from her tote. She says these are violation stickers, and if I do not resolve this by tomorrow, she is going to start tagging my property. I ask what that means, and she holds up a tag. It is a bright orange rectangle with adhesive backing, and it says Violation in block letters. She says she can tag my car, my door, my mailbox, anything that belongs to me. I ask if that is even legal, and she says it is HOA policy. I tell her to show me the policy, and she taps her laminated sheet again. I tell her if she puts a sticker on my property, I will file a vandalism report with the police. She laughs and says go ahead. The police do not handle HOA disputes. I tell her vandalism is vandalism, and she says good luck with that. She puts the tags back in her tote and says she will be back tomorrow morning, and if I have not returned the box by then, the tags are going on. She turns and walks away, and I close the door. I sit back down and open my laptop. I pull up the Cedar Springs bylaws and search for inspection. There is one mention, and it applies only to exterior maintenance inspections with 72 hours written notice. There is nothing about voluntary inspections or interior access. I screenshot the section and add it to my folder. Then I search for violation stickers. Nothing. I search for tagging. Nothing. Tracy is making up rules as she goes, and she is counting on residents not knowing the bylaws well enough to push back. I check my work schedule. I have a call out tomorrow at 6 in the morning, and I need to be on site by 7. If my gate access is suspended and I do not have a visitor pass, I will have to park outside the complex and walk in to get my equipment. That adds 20 minutes to my commute, and I cannot afford to be late. I text Diane and ask if I can pick up a visitor pass tonight. She replies and says the office is closed, but I can get one tomorrow starting at 8. I tell her my call out is at 6, and she says there is nothing she can do. I hear an engine outside, and I look out the window. A tow truck is parked in front of my building, and the driver is walking around my car with a clipboard. I run outside and the driver looks up. He says this vehicle is flagged for towing, and I ask under what policy. He says unauthorized parking in a resident spot. I tell him this is my assigned spot, and I show him my parking decal. He looks at it, and then looks at his clipboard. He says the order came from the HOA security contact, and she said the vehicle is parked illegally. I pull out my phone and show him my lease addendum with my assigned spot number. He compares it to the spot I am parked in, and they match. He says he is going to call his dispatcher and walks back to the truck. I hear him talking, and then he waves me over. He puts his phone on speaker, and a woman answers. The driver explains the situation, and the woman says, "Hold on, let me check the ticket." There is silence, and then she says the ticket was submitted by Tracy Benson, and it says the resident is parked in a guest spot. The driver tells her the resident is showing proof it is his assigned spot, and the woman says then the ticket is invalid, and we are not towing. The driver hangs up and hands me a copy of the tow order. It has Tracy's signature and a note that says vehicle parked in guest spot without authorization. I take a photo of the order and the driver leaves. I text Diane and attach the photo. I say Tracy just tried to have my car towed from my assigned spot using a false tow order. Diane replies immediately. She says save that photo, and she says she is forwarding it to the board tonight with a formal complaint. She says this is the 4th false tow order Tracy has submitted this month, and the board is going to have to act. I go back inside and add the tow order to my evidence folder. I now have proof Tracy deleted security footage, suspended my access without evidence, lied about an inspection policy, threatened to vandalize my property, and submitted a fraudulent tow order. I have enough to file a formal complaint with the board, but the next meeting is 3 weeks away. I need something faster. I call a friend who works in property management, and I ask him what my options are. He says if the HOA is retaliating, I can file a complaint with the Texas Attorney General or sue for harassment, but both of those take months. He says the fastest way to stop it is to prove Tracy is lying, and the best way to do that is to find the donation box. I tell him Tracy already deleted the footage, and he says footage is never really deleted. He says most security systems keep backups for at least 30 days, and even if Tracy deleted the file from the main server, there is probably a copy on a backup drive or in the cloud. I ask him how I can access the backup, and he says I cannot, but management can. He says I need to go back to Diane and ask her to request a backup file from the security vendor. He says if Tracy deleted the footage on purpose, that is evidence tampering, and the board will have to take action. I text Diane again and ask if she can request the backup footage. She replies and says she will try, but the security vendor contract gives Tracy control over footage requests, so she might block it. I tell her to try anyway, and she says she will send the request first thing tomorrow morning. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama. I spend the rest of the night reviewing the bylaws and drafting a formal complaint. I list every violation Tracy committed, and I attach all my evidence. I save the document and plan to submit it to the board secretary tomorrow after I get my visitor pass. I set an alarm for 5:30 so I can get to the office early and still make my call out. The next morning, I wake up and check my phone. Diane sent me an email at 6 in the morning. She says she submitted the footage request, and the security vendor replied that the footage in question was deleted per standard retention policy and no backup exists. She says the vendor confirmed Tracy authorized the deletion, and they have a signed request form on file. Diane says this is suspicious, and she is escalating it to the board president. I drive to the gate, and my fob does not work. I park outside the complex and walk to the management office. Diane is already there, and she has a visitor pass ready. She hands it to me through the window and says the pass is good until midnight tonight, and I have to come back tomorrow for a new one. I thank her and ask if she heard back from the board president. She says not yet, but she left him a voicemail and sent a follow-up email. She says he usually responds within 24 hours. I walk back to my car, grab my equipment, and drive to my call-out. The job takes 3 hours, and by the time I finish, it is almost 11. I check my phone, and I have 2 missed calls from a number I do not recognize. I call it back, and a man answers. He says this is Officer Ramirez with the Fort Worth Police Department, and I need to come down to the Cedar Springs clubhouse to answer some questions about a theft investigation. My stomach drops. I ask him what this is about, and he says a resident reported that I stole a donation box, and the HOA requested a police report. I tell him I already filed a dispute with the HOA, and he says that does not matter because the complainant wants a criminal investigation. I ask who the complainant is, and he says Tracy Benson. I tell him I will be there in 20 minutes. When I get to the clubhouse, Officer Ramirez is standing in the lobby with Tracy. She is holding her mesh evidence tote, and she has a smug look on her face. Ramirez is a young guy, probably mid-20s, and he looks uncomfortable. He asks me to step outside with him, and I follow him to the parking lot. He pulls out a notepad and asks me to tell him my side of the story. I give him the timeline. I was at work when the box went missing. I have a timesheet and GPS log that prove it. I filed a dispute with the HOA yesterday, and Tracy has been retaliating ever since. I show him the tow order, the suspension notice, and the bogus violation entries. Ramirez writes it all down, and then he asks if I have any proof I was at work during the time frame. I pull up my timesheet on my phone and show him. He takes a photo of it and says he is going to include it in the report. He asks me if I have any idea who might have taken the box, and I tell him no, but Tracy deleted the security footage before I could review it. Ramirez looks up. He says she deleted it? I nod, and I show him Diane's email. He reads it and shakes his head. He says that is not normal, and if this was a real theft investigation, the footage would be preserved. He says he is going to note that in the report, and he is going to recommend the HOA provide the backup footage if it exists. He walks back into the clubhouse, and I follow. Tracy is standing by the reception desk, and she is talking to Diane through the window. Ramirez tells Tracy he reviewed the complainant statement and the dispute evidence, and at this time there is no probable cause to pursue criminal charges. Tracy's face goes red. She says, "What about the witnesses?" Ramirez asks her to provide the witness names, and she says they asked to remain anonymous. Ramirez says anonymous witnesses are not admissible, and he needs names and contact information if she wants to move forward. Tracy says she will get them to him by tomorrow, and Ramirez says fine, but until then, the case is suspended. Tracy turns to me and says this is not over. She says she is going to add another administrative fee to my account for wasting police time. I ask her what policy allows that, and she says it is under the enforcement discretion clause. I tell her to show me the clause, and she says she does not have to justify herself to me. Ramirez cuts in and says, "Ma'am, if you are adding fees without a clear policy basis, that could be considered harassment." Tracy glares at him and says I know my job, and I do not need a lecture from you. Ramirez hands me a case number and says if Tracy continues to harass me, I can file a restraining order. He says the case is closed unless new evidence comes forward, and he is noting in the report that the complainant refused to provide witness information and deleted critical footage. He leaves, and Tracy storms out behind him. Diane catches my eye through the window and mouths call me. I wait until Tracy is gone, and then I walk up to the window. Diane slides a folder under the glass. She says I am not supposed to do this, but you need to see it. I open the folder, and inside is a printout of a security vendor policy memo. The memo is dated last week, and it outlines procedures for evidence retention. It says all footage related to active complaints must be preserved for 90 days, and deletion requires written approval from the board president. I asked Diane where she got this, and she says the vendor sent it to management 2 months ago when they renewed the contract. She says Tracy signed off on the policy, and she is in clear violation. Diane says she already forwarded the memo to the board president, and she included a summary of all the retaliation incidents. She says the board president called her this morning and he is scheduling an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. She says I should be there. I thank Diane and walk back to my car. I sit in the driver's seat and pull out my phone. I have a voicemail from my supervisor asking why I was late to the call out this morning. I call him back and explain the situation. He is not happy, but he says he understands, and he asks me to keep him updated. He says if the HOA keeps interfering with my work schedule, he will have to reassign my call-outs, and that could affect my hours. I drive home and spend the rest of the afternoon preparing for the emergency board meeting. I print out every piece of evidence I have, and I organize it into a binder. I include the tow order, the suspension notice, the violation entries, the footage deletion email, the vendor policy memo, the police case number, and my work timesheet. I write a one-page summary that outlines Tracy's pattern of retaliation, and I attach a formal complaint requesting her removal from the security vendor role. That night, I get a text from an unknown number. It says this is a courtesy reminder that your account has been assessed a $200 administrative fee for frivolous complaints. The fee is due within 14 days. I screenshot the text and add it to my binder. The number matches the HOA office line, which means it came from Tracy. The next evening, I arrive at the clubhouse for the emergency meeting. The board president is a man in his 60s named Phil, and he is sitting at a folding table with 2 other board members. There are about 15 residents in the room, and Tracy is standing in the back corner with her arms crossed. Diane is sitting near the front, and she nods at me when I walk in. Phil opens the meeting and says the purpose of tonight is to review recent enforcement actions and address complaints about the security vendor process. He says the board has received multiple complaints in the past month, and they need to determine if the current vendor relationship is working. He asks Tracy to present her side first. Tracy walks to the front and sets her mesh evidence tote on the table. She says the recent complaints are the result of residents refusing to follow the rules. She says she has been enforcing the bylaws consistently, and some residents do not like being held accountable. She says the theft investigation is ongoing, and she has multiple witnesses who confirm the suspect was at the clubhouse during the time frame. Phil asks her to name the witnesses, and she says she cannot disclose that information because it would compromise the investigation. Phil says this is not a criminal trial, and the board needs to know who is making the accusations. Tracy says the witnesses asked for anonymity because they are afraid of retaliation. Phil says that is not acceptable, and if she cannot provide names, the accusations are not credible. Tracy's face goes red, and she says I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes. A few residents laugh, and Tracy glares at them. Phil asks her why she deleted the security footage, and Tracy says it was deleted per standard retention policy. Phil holds up the vendor policy memo and says according to this, footage related to active complaints must be preserved for 90 days, and you deleted it after 2 days. Tracy says the complaint was not active at the time of deletion. Phil says the complaint was filed the same day the box went missing, and you deleted the footage the next day. Tracy says she did not realize the footage was related. Phil asks her how she did not realize, and Tracy says she was managing multiple complaints, and she made a mistake. Phil says this is the 3rd time this month you have deleted footage related to a dispute, and I am starting to see a pattern. Tracy says she is being unfairly targeted, and the board is undermining her authority. Phil says the board is not undermining anything. We are doing our job, and part of that job is oversight. Phil asks me to present my evidence, and I walk to the front. I hand him my binder, and I give a 2-minute summary. I explain the timeline, the retaliation, the false tow order, and the bogus fee. I show him the police case number and the officer's note that there is no probable cause. I show him the vendor policy memo and the footage deletion email. I show him the text message about the administrative fee, and I ask him to show me where in the bylaws that fee is authorized. Phil flips through the binder, and his face gets darker with each page. He asks Tracy if she submitted a false tow order, and Tracy says the order was based on a complaint from a resident. Phil asks who the resident was, and Tracy says she does not remember. Phil says you do not remember who filed a complaint 2 days ago? Tracy says she processes a lot of complaints. Phil closes the binder and says this is unacceptable. He says the board is going to vote tonight on whether to terminate the security vendor contract and remove Tracy from any enforcement role. Tracy interrupts and says, "You cannot do that. I have a contract." Phil says your company has a contract, not you personally, and the board has the authority to request a different point of contact. He says the vote will happen after we hear from other residents who have complaints. 3 other residents stand up and describe similar retaliation. One woman says Tracy tried to tow her car because she filed a noise complaint. A man says Tracy accused him of running a business out of his unit because he had a work van parked in his spot. Another woman says Tracy threatened to fine her for having a holiday wreath on her door in January. Every story follows the same pattern. Resident files a complaint. Tracy retaliates with bogus violations. Resident backs down or fights back. Diane raises her hand and says, "I have something to add." She walks to the front and hands Phil a folder. She says, "This morning I received an anonymous email with a photo attachment, and I think the board needs to see it." She opens the folder, and inside is a printed photo of a storage closet. The closet is full of boxes, bags, and bins, and sitting on the top shelf is a clear plastic bin with cash and checks visible inside. Phil asks where this photo was taken, and Diane says the metadata says it was taken in the clubhouse maintenance closet yesterday afternoon. Phil asks who has access to that closet, and Diane says only management and the security vendor. Phil looks at Tracy and asks if she recognizes the bin. Tracy says she has never seen it before. Phil asks her if she has access to the closet, and she says yes, but she has not been in there recently. Phil asks Diane if she can verify when the photo was taken, and Diane pulls out her phone. She opens the email and shows Phil the timestamp. The email was sent at 9 in the morning, and the photo metadata shows it was taken at 4 in the afternoon the day before. Phil asks if anyone checked the closet after receiving the email, and Diane says she went there immediately, and the bin was gone. Phil asks Tracy if she removed anything from the closet this morning, and Tracy says no. Phil asks her if she knows who sent the email, and Tracy says no. Phil says the email account is anonymous, but the photo metadata shows it was taken with a phone, and the phone's device ID is visible in the file properties. He asks Diane if she can trace the device ID, and Diane says she already did, and it matches the phone registered to the security vendor account. Tracy's face goes white. Phil asks her directly if she took the photo, and Tracy says she did not. Phil says then, how did a photo taken with your phone end up in an anonymous email? Tracy says her phone was stolen last week and someone must have used it. Phil asks if she filed a police report for the stolen phone, and Tracy says no. Phil says why not, and Tracy says she did not think it was worth the trouble. Phil closes the folder and says I am calling a recess, and when we come back, we are voting. He stands up and walks to the hallway, and the other board members follow. Tracy tries to follow, but Phil tells her to stay in the room. Tracy sits down in the back corner, and she pulls out her phone. I see her typing furiously, and then she makes a call. I cannot hear what she is saying, but her face is red, and her hands are shaking. Diane walks over to me and says I think we got her. She says the board president is furious, and she has never seen him this angry. She says the vote is going to be unanimous, and Tracy is done. I ask her who sent the anonymous email, and Diane leans in and whispers I think it was one of the maintenance staff, and I think they have been watching Tracy for weeks. The board comes back, and Phil calls the meeting to order. He says the board has reviewed the evidence, and we have determined that the current security vendor arrangement is not working. He says the board is voting to terminate the contract effective immediately, and we are requesting a new point of contact from the vendor company. He says Tracy Benson is hereby removed from any enforcement role at Cedar Springs, and she is prohibited from accessing HOA property or files without board approval. Tracy stands up and says you cannot do this, I have rights. Phil says you have the right to appeal, but the vote is final, and you need to leave the property now. Tracy grabs her mesh evidence tote and storms out. The door slams behind her, and the room is silent for a moment. Then one of the residents starts clapping, and the rest of the room joins in. Phil holds up his hand and says we are not done. He says the board is also voting to reverse all enforcement actions taken by Tracy in the past 30 days, including fines, suspensions, and violation notices. He says any resident who is affected should submit a dispute form, and the board will review them individually. He says the stolen donation box is still missing, and the board is hiring an independent investigator to review the security footage and determine what happened. I raise my hand and ask if my gate access will be reinstated, and Phil says yes, effective immediately. He says Diane will issue you a new fob tonight, and the suspension will be removed from your file. I thank him, and he nods. He says I am sorry this happened, and the board takes full responsibility for not acting sooner. The meeting ends, and I walk to the reception desk. Diane hands me a new gate fob and says congratulations. You earned this. She says the board is also refunding any fees Tracy assessed, and you should see the credit on your account within a week. I ask her what happens next, and she says the vendor company is sending a new point of contact tomorrow, and the board is implementing a new oversight process to prevent this from happening again. I walk out to the parking lot, and I see Tracy sitting in her car. She is on the phone, and she is yelling at someone. I walk past her, and she rolls down the window. She says this is not over, and I will make sure you regret this. I stop and turn around. I pull out my phone and start recording. I say I am recording this for documentation purposes. Tracy glares at me and says you think you are so smart. I say no, I just know how to follow the rules. She says I do not make the rules, I enforce them. I say not anymore. She rolls up the window and drives off. I save the video and send it to Diane with a note, just in case. Diane replies immediately. She says thank you, and she says the board president wants to meet with me next week to discuss adding a resident oversight committee for enforcement actions. She says he thinks I would be a good fit. The next morning, I wake up to an email from the board secretary. The email says the independent investigator reviewed the backup security footage, and the footage shows Tracy entering the clubhouse on the day the donation box went missing and leaving with a mesh tote that was not visible when she entered. The investigator says the footage also shows Tracy accessing the maintenance closet the next day and removing a clear plastic bin. The board is forwarding the footage to the Fort Worth Police Department, and they are recommending criminal charges. I forward the email to Officer Ramirez, and he calls me back within an hour. He says the department is opening a theft investigation, and Tracy is being asked to come in for an interview. He says the footage is clear, and if Tracy does not cooperate, the department will pursue charges. I thank him, and hang up. 2 days later, Diane texts me and says Tracy returned the donation box this morning. She says the box was dropped off at the management office with a note that said it was found in a storage area. Diane says the board counted the cash, and it is about $200 short. She says the board is filing a civil claim to recover the missing funds, and Tracy has been permanently banned from Cedar Springs property. A week later, I get a call from Phil. He says the vendor company terminated Tracy's contract, and they issued a formal apology to the board. He says the company is also refunding the last 2 months of service fees as a gesture of goodwill. Phil says the board voted to use the refund to install new security cameras with tamper-proof cloud backup, and they are hiring a third-party auditor to review all enforcement actions going forward. Phil asks me if I am still interested in joining the oversight committee, and I say yes. He says the first meeting is next month, and the committee's job is to review all violation notices and enforcement actions before they are finalized. He says the board wants to make sure what happened with Tracy never happens again. I tell him I appreciate the opportunity, and I will be there. The next week, I run into one of the residents who spoke at the meeting. She says she heard Tracy is trying to get a job with another HOA in the area, but the word is out, and no one will hire her. She says the vendor company also added a clause to their contracts that requires board approval for any enforcement actions, and they are training all their staff on evidence preservation. She says Tracy's mess turned into a policy overhaul, and every HOA in the region is paying attention. I check my HOA account, and the suspension is gone. The bogus violations are gone. The administrative fee is gone. My account balance is $0, and there is a credit memo for $50. I screenshot it and send it to my supervisor with a note. Issue resolved. He replies and says good, because I have 3 callouts for you this week, and I need you back on the schedule. I spend the rest of the month settling back into my routine. The new security point of contact is a woman named Maria, and she is the opposite of Tracy. She introduces herself to every resident, she answers questions, and she follows the rules. The first time I see her, she is helping a resident file a noise complaint, and she is taking detailed notes. I ask her how she likes working at Cedar Springs, and she says it is great, and she appreciates that the board actually cares about oversight. One afternoon, I am walking to my car, and I see Diane in the parking lot. She waves me over and says I have some news. She says the Fort Worth Police Department arrested Tracy last week on theft charges, and she is facing 3 counts of misdemeanor theft. Diane says the charges are related to the donation box, 2 other missing petty cash envelopes, and a package that was reported stolen from the clubhouse mail area. She says the police found evidence in Tracy's car, including the mesh tote and several unopened packages. Diane says Tracy tried to claim the packages were hers, but the shipping labels had other residents' names. She says Tracy is also being investigated for filing false police reports, and the district attorney is considering additional charges. Diane says the board is cooperating with the investigation, and they handed over all the footage and emails. I ask Diane what happens if Tracy is convicted, and Diane says she will probably get probation and restitution. But the bigger consequence is that she will never work in property management or HOA enforcement again. Diane says the vendor company is also facing a lawsuit from another HOA where Tracy worked before Cedar Springs, and that HOA is claiming Tracy stole funds and falsified records. Diane says Tracy's career is over, and it is her own fault. A month later, I attend the first oversight committee meeting. There are 5 residents on the committee, and Phil is the board liaison. The first agenda item is reviewing a proposed enforcement policy that requires photographic evidence, witness statements, and a 72-hour notice period before any fine or suspension can be issued. The committee votes to approve the policy, and Phil says it will be added to the bylaws at the next annual meeting. The second agenda item is reviewing 3 pending violation notices. The first notice is for a resident who left trash cans out past the pickup deadline. Maria submitted photos showing the cans were still out at noon, and the resident has a history of repeat violations. The committee votes to approve a warning letter. The second notice is for a resident who painted their front door a non-approved color. Maria submitted photos, and the resident says they were told the color was approved by the previous management company. The committee votes to table the notice pending clarification from the board. The third notice is for a resident who has a dog over the weight limit. Maria submitted photos, and the resident says the dog is a service animal. The committee votes to request documentation and table the notice. Phil says this is exactly how the process should work, and he thanks the committee for their time. He says the board is already seeing fewer disputes, and resident satisfaction is up. He says the oversight committee is making a real difference. I leave the meeting and walk back to my townhome. My phone buzzes, and it is a text from Diane. She says Tracy pleaded no contest to 2 counts of theft, and she was sentenced to 1 year probation and $500 restitution. Diane says Tracy is also banned from working in any HOA or property management role for 5 years as part of her probation. Diane says the board is satisfied with the outcome, and they are closing the case. I sit on my porch and think about the past 2 months. I think about the confrontation at the gate, the false accusations, the retaliation, the emergency meeting, and the investigation. I think about how close I came to losing my job because Tracy wanted to flex her authority. I think about the other residents who were bullied into silence because they did not have the time or resources to fight back. I think about how one person with unchecked power can create chaos, and how important it is to have oversight. The next week, I am at the mailbox cluster, and I run into the receptionist who was at the management office during the final confrontation. Her name is Linda, and she works part-time answering phones. She says she heard about the oversight committee, and she thinks it is a great idea. She says she saw Tracy try to bully residents every single day, and she is glad someone finally stood up to her. I ask her if she ever said anything to the board, and she says she tried, but Tracy always had an excuse, and the board did not take it seriously until residents started documenting everything. Linda says the day of the emergency meeting, she watched Tracy try to intimidate Diane into not forwarding the vendor policy memo to the board. She says Tracy told Diane that if she sent the memo, Tracy would make sure Diane lost her job. Linda says Diane sent it anyway, and Linda was so proud of her. Linda says Tracy underestimated how many people were watching, and that was her downfall. I thank Linda for sharing, and she says no, thank you for not giving up. She says a lot of residents would have just moved out, and the board would never have known how bad it was. She says you standing your ground forced the board to act, and now everyone is better off. I walk back to my townhome, and I see Maria doing a property walk with a clipboard. She waves at me, and I wave back. She is checking exterior lights, and she is taking notes. I watch her for a minute, and I realize this is what enforcement should look like. Quiet, professional, and focused on actual problems instead of manufactured drama. That evening, I get a notification from the resident portal. The board posted a new announcement. The announcement says the Oversight Committee has been officially added to the bylaws, and all enforcement actions will now be reviewed before being finalized. The announcement says the board is committed to transparency and fairness, and they are implementing quarterly town halls to gather resident feedback. The announcement ends with a thank you to the residents who spoke up and helped improve the community. I close the portal and open my evidence folder. I scroll through the photos, the emails, the screenshots, and the videos. I think about deleting it, but then I decide to keep it. Not because I think I will need it again, but because it is a reminder that documentation matters, persistence matters, and standing up to bullies matters. A few weeks later, I am at the clubhouse for a community event, and Phil pulls me aside. He says the board received a letter from Tracy's attorney, requesting that the board remove all references to Tracy from the meeting minutes and public records. Phil says the board voted to deny the request because the minutes are factual, and the board has a duty to maintain accurate records. Phil says Tracy's attorney threatened to sue, but the board's attorney said the board is protected under the business judgment rule, and the lawsuit has no merit. Phil says he wanted me to know because Tracy is still trying to rewrite history, but the board is not going to let that happen. He says the meeting minutes, the footage, and the investigation report are all part of the permanent record, and they will stay there. He says Tracy made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. I thank Phil for keeping me in the loop, and he says it is the least we can do. He says the board learned a hard lesson about oversight, and they are not going to make the same mistake twice. He says the Oversight Committee is working, the new vendor is working, and the community is stronger because of it. I leave the clubhouse and walk home. The sun is setting, and the complex is quiet. I pass the gate, and my fob works on the first try. I pass the mailbox cluster, and there are no bogus violation notices taped to the boxes. I pass the clubhouse, and the donation box is back on the front desk with a sign that says all donations are counted and logged by 2 staff members. I get to my townhome, and I sit on the porch. I think about the anonymous email with the photo of the stash bin, and I wonder who sent it. I think about the maintenance staff who were watching Tracy for weeks, and I wonder how many other people knew what she was doing but were too scared to say anything. I think about the moment Tracy said I do not need proof, I have paperwork and vibes, and how that line came back to destroy her credibility. I think about the final humiliation moment at the emergency meeting when Tracy repeated her catchphrase, "I do not make the rules, I enforce them," and the receptionist, Linda, repeated it back to her in a flat, unimpressed tone that made the whole room laugh. I think about how Tracy tried to weaponize authority, and how she ended up powerless. I think about the witness statement that was recorded calmly and could not be twisted, and how that became the payback vector that forced the board to act. I think about how management disciplined the staff process that enabled the frame-up, and how Karen was removed from the neighborhood chat moderator role. I think about how every single piece of evidence I gathered mattered, and how the system only worked because people refused to let Tracy get away with it. The lights come on across the complex, and I hear kids playing in the courtyard. I hear someone grilling on their patio, and I smell burgers. I hear a dog barking, and I hear someone laughing. The complex feels normal again, and I realize that is the real victory. Not the meeting, not the vote, not the arrest. The real victory is that the community is functioning the way it is supposed to, and people are not afraid anymore. I go inside and check my work schedule. I have 2 callouts tomorrow, and I need to be on site by 7. I set my alarm, and I plug in my phone. I look at my gate fob sitting on the counter, and I smile. It is just a plastic card with a chip, but it represents something bigger. It represents access, autonomy, and the right to live in my home without harassment. It represents the idea that rules should be fair, enforcement should be transparent, and power should be checked. I sit down at my kitchen table and open my laptop. I pull up the HOA portal one more time, and I check my account. 0 balance. No violations. No pending actions. I close the laptop and lean back in my chair. It took 2 months, a police investigation, and an emergency board meeting, but I cleared my name, and I made sure Tracy could never do this to anyone else. I think about the stolen donation box, and I think about the packages Tracy took from the mail area. I think about the petty cash envelopes, and I think about the mesh evidence tote she carried around like a trophy. I think about how she thought she was untouchable, and how she thought paperwork and vibes were enough to destroy someone's life. I think about how wrong she was. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.